Alright. Let's try to get another one out. Let's check this stuff out. Apparently everybody's ganging up on China. See what's going on with that, and they're trying to send us over another virus. It's like they didn't learn anything from COVID-19. Let's check that out first.
I think the origins are so obvious. They came out of the Wuhan lab, and I think if anybody thinks
Oh my god, dude. You didn't waste, like, literally absolutely no time.
anything differently, they're just kidding themselves.
Oh, man.
So you can ask, China has to pay. They have to do something. They have to pay reparations. And China doesn't have the money to pay those reparations. I believe that...
I mean, dude, like, when COVID-19, when they found out that COVID-19 was about to happen, like a couple of months, like almost like a half a year before COVID-19 was about to happen, instead of, like, you know, warning the other nations and stuff about this crap, you know what they did? You know what they fucking did? They bought all the medical supplies and basically bought out everybody, so in that way when the pandemic happened, everybody else was fucked. Yo, China is a clown, dude. They started the problem and made it worse, and then they're trying to blame us for it. Do you fucking hear these guys?
Worldwide, I'm not just talking United States, worldwide, $60 trillion of damage. 60 trillion. China doesn't have $60 trillion, but they have to do something to make up for what they've done. What they've done to the world is so horrible.
Last time there was a trade war between China and Trump, we got COVID-19. And this time there's a trade war between China and Trump. We just arrested a Chinese national trying to enter the United States with dangerous pathogen that could destroy our whole food supply. As if this wasn't bad enough, there was a statement on...
Dude, that's totally not suspecto, right? Totally not suspectamundo. You wouldn't want to, you know, question that guy, right?
...of the Chinese national pledging loyalty to the CCP. Here's more details.
First, a Chinese couple charged with smuggling a potential agro-terrorism weapon into the U.S. The feds say the woman works in a lab at the University of Michigan and had a statement on her phone pledging loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party. Her boyfriend allegedly had an article on his phone about plant pathogen warfare. The Fed says the fungus they are accused of smuggling causes head blight. It's a disease that infects wheat, barley, maize, and rice. It then causes vomiting, liver damage, reproductive defects too in humans and livestock.
So these guys are actually trying to do biological warfare. Whoa. Time out. So these guys are actually trying to do biological warfare, and we haven't done anything about it? What the hell is going on, dude? Why are we not, like, holding them responsible for this? What the flippin' H, Bobby? Totally unacceptable. What the
story
hell?
Has more twists and turns. The news first broke from this tweet by the FBI director Kash Patel. I can confirm that the FBI arrested a Chinese national within the United States who allegedly smuggled a dangerous biological pathogen into the country. The individual, Yuqing Jian, is alleged to have smuggled a dangerous fungus called, whatever that's called, which is an agro-terrorism agent, into the United States to research at University of Michigan, where she works. This fungus can cause disease called head blight, a disease of wheat, barley, maize, rice, causing significant health issues in both humans and livestock. It is responsible for billions of dollars in economic losses worldwide each year. Evidence also indicates Jian had expressed loyalty to Chinese Communist Party and had received funding from Chinese government for similar work on this pathogen.
Oh of course. Why am I actually not surprised?
Quick pause right there. We'll get into more evidence later in the video, but it was clearly a premeditated effort to hide the smuggling of the pathogen. Jian's boyfriend, Zhuyong Liu, also charged in the complaint, works at a Chinese university while he conducts research on same pathogen. Liu is alleged to have first lied, then admitted to also smuggling the same virus into the United States through the Detroit Metropolitan Airport so that he could conduct research at the University of Michigan. Both individuals have been charged with conspiracy, smuggling goods into the United States, false statements, and visa fraud. This case is a sobering reminder that the CCP is working around the clock to deploy operatives and researchers to infiltrate American institutions and target our food supply, which would have grave consequences, putting American lives and our economy at serious risk. Before moving forward, if you guys can please hit that subscribe button down below to keep up with all the geopolitical news like this one. Let's begin. The arrest affidavit that was published on the government website provides more details to what exactly happened. So it seems the boyfriend, Liu, was trying to smuggle in this pathogen in his shoes. After reading that,
what the oh my god! We're just letting them, oh my. So you're telling me that I can't sneak weed into the country, but this guy just like almost fucking, you know, just snuck in with like World War Z? My man just snuck in with like the the Walking Dead virus, the T virus, and it's just honky dory, dude. Like,
I started
what?
to understand why they make you take off your shoes with TSA. But we actually have a translation of a WeChat conversation between the Liu and Jian, boyfriend and girlfriend, which talks about how often they do this and how they fool the TSA basically. Here's the chat. Here you can see the whole conversation on your screen. You can see Jian explaining to Liu, her boyfriend, who's doing the same research in China at a Chinese university, on how to bring in the pathogen into the United States. They have multiple shoes and they put it under the sole of the shoes, hoping that the TSA would not catch them.
Oh man.
On top of this,
I swear, bro. If these guys start ripping apart shoes now and just randomly, like a random person just gets their shoes destroyed because of these fuckers now, I'm gonna be so pissed, dude. Like, there's gonna be such a xenophobia for these people. There's a lot of stuff coming out, it's not even
arrest
funny.
affidavit also goes on to explain that this is not the first time she tried doing something like this. In the past, she has also asked third parties, so someone else, to send her the pathogen through US mail or any kind of mail. Here's the image of how they do it. They hide the pathogen in a Ziploc bag, then they hide it in some big book. In this case, it was a statistic book. The latest smuggling attempt took place in July 2024, just last year, when Liu entered the US at Detroit Metropolitan Airport on a tourist visa to visit his girlfriend. US Border Protection flagged his arrival and searched his luggage, and that's when they found all the stuff that we have seen in the arrest affidavit. When questioned about the pathogen, initially Liu denied knowing that he put them in his bag, but later he admitted to doing.
My man literally got caught being a communist spy and is trying to claim he's not a communist spy while being caught being a communist spy with the evidence to confirm that he is the communist spy while doubting that he is the communist spy. Oh man, it's like you can't make this crap up, dude. Well, and I didn't even mention that while coming from a communist country. We don't already suspect you enough, buddy.
Doing it intentionally. He also revealed his entire scheme to the investigators, including telling them that he planned to use the same laboratory that his girlfriend used at University of Michigan to conduct research. He said that some days during his visit, the lab would be open for use. After admitting to all this, Liu was deported back to China since he was here on a visa, and unfortunately we don't have an extradition treaty with China, so it's unlikely that he will face prosecution, but he was charged in this complaint. Now this is where we need to talk again about how CCP is using Chinese students who are coming over here to study as spies and as operatives. Now before we even get into that, I want to put this disclaimer again. A lot of the times, Chinese students don't really have a choice. They are doing this against their will, but their families are still back in China, and CCP asks you to do anything, you cannot really say no. So I really do want to put this disclaimer here, but here's more details.
Gordon, the suspect is described as a, quote, Communist Party loyalist and researcher at the University of Michigan. To me, those words should never be in the same sentence. Why are American universities harboring the enemy often throughout our nation in the name of research?
Because the universities make a lot of money from China, through students, through other ways, contributions. And that's why we have these very disturbing ties between American institutions of higher learning and China. And we need to break that because obviously the dangers are there, as we see with this fungus case.
This is where I want to bring your guys' attention to another story relating to a Chinese student that hasn't gotten any media attention. May 30th, Chinese national Guo Haojiang, a former University of Michigan student
my man
who
really
voted
struggled to say that.
illegally in 2024
I don't blame him,
election,
though.
was charged with federal offense of flight to avoid prosecution based on allegations that he jumped bond and fled the US to avoid his state offenses. After being charged with false claims to register to vote and voting by aliens in 15th District Court in Ann Arbor on November 8th last year, Gao surrendered his Chinese passport in his name bearing a serial number ending in 1332. Then he was released
Surrendered his
on bond.
passport?
However,
Why?
on January 19th, he boarded Delta Flight
Such an odd
389
thing
at Detroit Metropolitan
to do.
Airport and flew to Shanghai using a different Chinese passport in his name that included a serial number ending in 7.
This guy's a freaking scammer.
It was
This guy's basically just a scammer. Why have they not caught his multiple, like, there's no way to just track the face rather than the name? Like, if it, the same face keeps popping up on different IDs, can't they just I would imagine there's like some algorithm or something that could just track that specific feature down. Like, I don't know.
unclear how he obtained the second passport, and the US does not have an extradition treaty with China. Gao illegally registered to vote in the days before the 2024 presidential election, apparently using his University of Michigan student ID, and then cast a ballot in the election at a polling location located at University of Michigan Museum of Art, Michigan. Gao made false
This guy's a
statements
freaking
regarding
scammer.
his citizenship on his voter registration application
Ha.
and his early voting.
He's a communist
application.
scammer.
After being charged with state offenses, the state court granted
Hold on, chat. I gotta pee really quick.
granted Gao a $5,000 personal bond with conditions.
Oh, wait, whoa. Oh, shit. Alright.
Including that he does not
Try to
leave the
reconnect
state
my
of
mic.
Michigan and that he surrenders his passport for the pendency of the case. Gao did surrender his Chinese passport, but eventually fled the US with a different Chinese passport on January 19th.
Yeah, he's a fucking
Now,
commie,
I want
dude.
everyone to question two things. First of all, why was he voting?
I'm not questioning anything. Because I already know he's a commie. And commies have a way about things. They know how to get into places that they shouldn't be. Because they're communist
in a
freaking
US
spies.
election when he was not a citizen? But secondly, why did a
A- You're really gonna ask how? How he was able to do that? Are you serious? Are you for real right now? Are we just gonna ignore the fact that like our last president literally just basically had a bunch of illegal immigrants invade our country just so he could try to get free votes? And the last runner-up as well? Like what? What?
Chinese student, a normal Chinese student, have two different Chinese passports. It's pretty easy to assume what he was doing here in the United States. So the question
Hey, he's a
rises,
fucking
what
scammer.
else was he doing other than just voting in our elections? Because we did catch him in that, but I'm pretty sure there were other things that he was carrying out here that we have no clue about. This is exactly why the United States recently revoked a lot of visas for Chinese students, especially students who are related to the Chinese Communist Party. Now, of course, that wasn't the
Good.
best solution, but we had to
Fucking
do something
good.
until we figure out a permanent solution. But the thing is, in China, there are roughly 100 million people who are member of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. And the chances of one of their kids coming to the United States to get a higher education is very high. Because to leave China, first of all, you need an exit
high.
visa
It's like
and you
almost
need a lot of
inevitable.
money. In fact, recent reports suggest that Xi Jinping's own daughter was actually studying at Harvard and living here in the United States. Now, in a second, we'll get into
Oh my
what does
God.
this mean, but for now, let's quickly go over why exactly is Trump administration doing this right now.
Well, the 2017 National Intelligence Law of China requires Chinese nationals
Like that should be like a. Oh man, I feel like we're like missing out on an opportunity, dude. Like, bro, what? That should be like a perfect opportunity to like, do some type of trade. Like, yo, bro, if your daughter wants to continue going to school here, you better start bucking up and letting our citizens become students over there. Because yeah, quickly it could change. God, I don't know, dude. I don't know why we're like slacking right now. Like, what the fuck is going on? Feels like super weird.
to commit acts of espionage if demanded. But also, the Communist Party's top-down system means that no Chinese national can disobey an order from the party. So China has weaponized students, and it's about time we recognize that. And I think that Secretary Rubio did exactly the right thing. You know, people may say this is drastic, but we had a situation which was an emergency, and finally we got an administration willing to do something about it.
Now, of course, I don't think this is a permanent thing. We're not just pausing students' visas from China. But the espionage issue has been going on
Even
for
though
a
we
long
fucking
time,
should.
and we have covered this on this channel multiple times. And the universities were
Given that they're
refusing to
fucking
take
commies.
any concrete steps to address this issue. And the big reason behind that laziness, I guess, was that a lot of the universities were receiving a lot of anonymous donations from Chinese billionaires who didn't want these universities to basically crack down on Chinese espionage. And that's exactly why the Trump administration had to step in, and they had to do something if the universities weren't willing to. And of course, China is fighting back against every action US takes. Do you guys remember just a few weeks ago we covered how there was a bombshell lawsuit in Missouri where the court and the judge awarded
Yeah.
Missouri
That's exactly what I kept mentioning before, where the court, like Missouri, basically sued China, and since China, can't really fight back because they're fucking communists, they fucking lost all their basically land here, and Missouri got all their land back because they basically were able to prove that China was doing some communist, some communist spying shit, and they basically purposely would buy land close to military installations, type shit. I'm not really sure actually if those are both, tied to the same thing, but I'm pretty sure it is actually. I'll have to fact check that later.
the state of Missouri,
Let
with
me
a
know in the comments
$24
if I'm
billion
wrong.
judgment because China
Pretty
lied
sure that's
about
what it was.
COVID and they hoarded
If I'm not
medical
mistaken.
supplies.
Yeah, literally what I just said. They've just been fucking jacking military supplies.
Attorney General Andrew Bailey won a lawsuit against China claiming they hoarded PPE during the pandemic, and China was ordered to pay
they hoarded
$24.5 billion. Chinese officials
Hoarded
said
some
they don't
pepe.
recognize the ruling and called the lawsuit absurd when it was filed back in 2020. Now Bailey says he's preparing to seize Chinese assets in the state to get the money, and the assets include that farmland we've talked about a lot here on American Sunrise.
Well, soon after this, the White House updated the COVID.gov government website. And on that website, they
Oh, yeah.
provide more evidence to the lab leak theory that was considered conspiracy just a few years back. You
Oh, yeah,
see, now we have
conspiracy.
multiple different agencies here in the United States saying with 99% certainty that it's very, very likely that COVID-19
It's not very
originated
likely,
in the
100%.
Wuhan lab.
What?
It was not from a bat.
Oh
it was
my
not
god.
from some flu.
Are we
virus.
really doing this?
Here's
Nah, wait, what? Are we really doing this? Are we really saying highly likely, acting like we don't already know? Bro, it's done, dude. It's clipped though. We know where it came from, dude. We're not stupid. This whole thing just made people distrust the governments of the world, and ultimately World Health Organization, and ultimately China for the most part. Like, bro, you can't even tell your fellow man that you just, you know, accidentally created an outbreak, or well, I don't know if you created, but at least you accidentally, like, you know, caused an outbreak of a freaking virus, and instead of telling us, instead of telling the entire governments of the world, you know, it's one thing if, you know, you told the rest of the governments of the world, and then, you know, you kind of let the governments, you know, deal with it on their own, you know, whether they want to keep it a secret or, you know, tell their people, that's on them, but at least you told their government something. That's one thing. But dude, you didn't do nothing. You literally just bought all the medical supplies, sold everybody out, and then when shit hit the fan, you like, oh, sorry, we don't know what's going on. Like, well, what? What? And then you're confused when the entire world is like turning against you. Like, I don't
That's what
know.
the website says. Number 1, the virus possesses a biological characteristic that is not found in nature. Number 2, data shows that all COVID-19 cases stem from a single introduction into human. This runs contrary
Basically
to
just
previous
all shit that we
pandemics where
already
there
know.
were multiple spillover events. Number 3, Wuhan is home
crap.
to China's foremost SARS research lab, which has a history of conducting
SARS?
gain-of-function research at inadequate biosafety levels. Number 4, Wuhan Institute of Virology. Researchers were sick with COVID-like symptoms in fall of 2019, months before
Of course they were.
COVID-19 was discovered at
Yeah,
the wet
that's what I was
market.
just saying.
Number 5,
Not even
by
surprised.
nearly all
Like, they literally went on like a whole thing, even saying that masks literally don't do shit. Like, all these people wearing masks, you just look goofy. Like, that literally didn't do nothing.
measures of science.
Sorry.
If there was evidence
lied
of a
to.
natural origin, it would have been surfaced already, but it hasn't. Well, guess what China did after COVID-19 was
Just guess,
discovered
yes,
in China?
yes,
Xi
yes.
Jinping shut down all flights from Wuhan to rest of China, but he allowed all the flights from Wuhan to international countries to continue. That means it was easier for the virus to spread overseas than it was inside China. But on top of that, China started preparing,
actual
started
clown,
hoarding
dude.
medical supplies, all the while
Yeah.
not notifying the world what they
They're
had
freaking
discovered.
jerks.
Well, the CCP is not a fan of White House publishing all this, so China has hit back. China is now claiming that COVID-19
they hit
originated
back, quote unquote.
in the United States. China restated its
unquote.
case that COVID-19 may have originated in the United States in a white paper on its pandemic response released on Wednesday after President Trump administration blamed a lab leak in China. White paper goes on to say substantial evidence suggested that COVID-19 might have emerged in the United States earlier than its officially
It
claimed
didn't suggest,
timeline,
it
and
told
earlier
us.
than the outbreak in China. Well, even if that's the case, you can imagine why. CCP let the international
China!
flights continue, all the while banning domestic flights from Wuhan. YouTube just dropped a mind-boggling announcement.
Oh man, that's crazy. That's just insane to me how, like, even after all this time where we basically have facts and evidence that they're the ones that, you know, started this bull crap, they're still trying to
Europe is
blame
done
us.
with China, and this
And then they're-
massive
and
shift
then they're
has cost
confused
invasion
why
nearly
Europe is done with
$1
China, yeah.
trillion.
EU plans to increase tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles.
Too often our companies are excluded from foreign markets or are victims of predatory practices. We have not forgotten China's unfair trade practices.
China has slammed the European Commission's decision to investigate its electric vehicle subsidies.
When U.S. tariffs crushed China's markets, Beijing ran to Europe, expecting open arms and big deals. For a hot minute, it looked really good, with fancy summits happening and bold promises being made. But the honeymoon's over.
You hear these
Recently,
clowns?
the EU has started to pull back. It is slashing Chinese exports, digging into Beijing's shady trade
I wonder
practices,
why.
and blacklisting China-linked firms. This major shift is leaving China cut off from one of the world's biggest markets. The CCP bet on Europe as its lifeline, but it's getting a brutal reality
And you
check.
bet wrong, bro.
So what sparked Europe's rebellion?
Bet wrong,
and what
because
does this mean
we
for
were the
world's
ones giving you
economic
most of your
future?
money, you clown.
Let's unpack the chaos. Right now, things are looking rough for China in Europe. Let's start by discussing the most recent openly hostile acts that shows the mood Europe is in. In June of 2025, Europe landed a massive blow by blocking Chinese companies from grabbing medical device contracts in the EU. Why? Well, China's been caught cheating, favoring its own firms in shady deals, and Europe's done letting it slide.
They've been caught cheating.
But this is bigger than just hospital equipment. The
What-
EU
what
is
else
also
could they
fighting back
stoop
with
so
hefty
low to
tariffs
do?
on Chinese tin plate, tires, and heavy
wonder.
machinery. All of this is to stop China's flood of cheap goods from crushing local businesses. Europe is so serious that it is even planning to slap taxes on dirt cheap imports from sites like Temu and Shein, aiming to choke China's
Temu.
e-commerce stranglehold. Europe calls
Oh,
it de-risking,
man. We were just
but it's
talking
really
about
about
last
breaking
fucking-
free from China's economic
last
claws.
YouTube video.
Beijing's thrown a fit, hitting back with weak investigations into Europe's pork and
fit,
dairy,
thrown a
but it's
fit.
clear that Xi Jinping is just panicking. The fight is not just about trade. Europe's
He's
slamming the
panicking
doors
in
on China's tech
galoshes.
tricks, with Germany booting Huawei from its 5G network fears over Chinese spying. The EU is poking around Chinese electric cars and wind turbines, worried they're rigged to steal data. They're
why
also
wou-
racing
yeah,
to
why
ditch
wouldn't
China's
they?
grip on critical.
Like, dude, we were talking about the same country that just spread out global pandemic, and instead of warning the entire world about it, they hoarded supplies for themselves. Why would anybody trust them ever again? You'd have to be a complete moron to trust them. Like, what?
Materials like lithium, which China hoards like a greedy giant. We'll discuss this further later in the video. Europe.
This is like owning a weapon, like a firearm. Actually, this is like you being a grown adult, you know, like a dad, and you have a kid. You have two kids, right? You have like two males. You have like a 19-year-old, and you have like an 8-year-old, and you have a rifle or you have a gun, and you decide that your 19-year-old is old enough to own a gun and be responsible enough, so you entrust him with your, the kid that you got when you were a kid. And in like 2 days, all of a sudden, you hear that your 8-year-old accidentally fucking shot himself in the foot because your 19-year-old didn't lock up his weapon safely.
Europe's calling out China's human rights disasters too, hitting officials with sanctions for abuses in Xinjiang. As if the message was not clear enough, the EU is boosting ties with Taiwan. They have begun to send warships
it's all
to
about the
patrol the
boost.
South China Sea, moves that drive Beijing super crazy. With Germany's new government, sworn in this June, ready to crank up the pressure, Europe is standing tall.
Oh,
China's desperation for Europe's markets isn't just ambition, it's, well, survival. With the US slapping huge tariffs on Chinese goods like 125% on electronics,
China's getting
Beijing's exports to America
bamboozled
tanked
right now.
heavily in early 2025. That's billions in losses for a country whose factories need to keep humming to employ millions. Europe, with its almost trillion-dollar
Most factories
market,
have been
looked
shutting
like the
down
perfect
right now.
lifeline to replace those lost
the
sales.
tariffs,
China thought
the
it could
tariffs.
charm the EU with cheap products and big projects, keeping its economy afloat. But that plan's crumbling, and Beijing's learning the hard way that Europe won't be its backup.
Yep.
Instead of rolling out the red carpet,
That's a
the
fact.
EU is
And
fighting
it
back.
shouldn't be.
And China is
Because if you do, that
scrambling
means
to
you're
save
just letting
face.
China
But
bully
the
you,
big
basically.
question is, how did we get here?
Bully your economy.
To
Why
really
would
get
you
why
want that?
Europe is pulling away, we need to look at what
Literally.
happened a few years ago. The reactions might be recent, but this all started back in 2018, when China ran into trouble with the United States. And yes, this was when President Trump first took office. The US under President Trump started hitting Chinese goods with tariffs. This made it harder for China to sell
Good.
things like steel and electronics in America. China's economy depends
Little
a lot
jikes.
on exports, so this was a huge hit. With the US market getting tougher, China needs a new place to send its products and keep its factories running. That's when it turned to Europe. Europe seems like the perfect partner. The EU is one of the richest markets in the world, with people who buy everything from cars to clothes to high-tech gadgets. China saw a chance to step in and fill the gap left by its troubles with the US. So Beijing started working hard to win Europe over. It wasn't just about selling more stuff. It was about building a deeper relationship that
It was
could keep China's
100%
economy
about
strong
selling
for
more
years
stuff.
to come. At first, Europe was open to the idea. China and the EU started talking about ways to trade more easily. They held big meetings where leaders from both sides sat down and made plans. These weren't just photo ops, they were serious discussions about money and cooperation. One of China's big ideas is the Belt and Road Initiative, a plan to build things like roads, ports, and railways all over the world to make trade easier. Europe was a key part of this.
Yeah, right, dude. You're not fooling everybody. Make trade easier. Yeah, okay. No, dude. You just want to secretly own a piece of land in every territory that bridge crosses. You're not fooling anybody, dude. It's called just reading terms and services. That's all it takes. And any country that didn't read the terms and services, you're a fool. You're a fool.
Chinese companies poured money into European projects, like upgrading ports in Greece so it could handle more ships. They also started working on train lines in places like Serbia, which would connect Europe to Asia and make it faster to move goods. These projects got a lot of attention. In Greece, the port deal meant more jobs and busier docks, which was a win for a country that had been struggling economically. In other parts of Europe, leaders saw Chinese investment as a way to boost their own economies. Germany, which makes a ton of cars and machinery, was especially interested. German companies like BMW and Mercedes were already selling millions of vehicles in China. They really wanted to keep that market growing. Overall, from their view, if China were willing to invest in Europe, it could mean more factories, more jobs, and more sales for European businesses. France was on board, but for different reasons. French companies make things like wine, perfume, and designer clothes, stuff that China's growing middle class was starting to buy. The idea of a closer relationship with China meant French brands could sell even more. There was even a big plan called the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment. This was supposed to make it easier for European companies to do business in China and for Chinese companies to invest in Europe. Both sides spent years negotiating it, and for a while it looked like a done deal. The mood was optimistic, and it seemed like China and Europe were building something that could last. But even as these deals were coming together, there were signs of trouble. You see, China wasn't just sending money to Europe, it was sending a flood of goods. By 2023, Chinese products were everywhere in Europe, from cheap electronics to electric cars. Since then, it's only gotten worse. Now, in 2025, amidst the US-China trade war, Chinese exports have been directed to Europe, and they have saturated the markets. This flood has come at the expense of local markets, who, as you might imagine, are being kicked out of business. It hasn't been a slow trickle. It's been a massive wave that started to worry people. This flooding of the market has occurred across all industries, including the automotive industry. Let's talk about electric cars for a second.
I would imagine
Chinese companies like BYD and Geely have taken over Europe,
Trump's
which
trying to get
is
the motor
almost
industry
scary.
back
When they
here.
entered the market, they began selling electric cars at prices that were hard to beat for European manufacturers. A BYD electric SUV, for example, could cost 20% less than a similar car from Volkswagen or Tesla. How could they do that?
Damn.
The Chinese government was giving these
20%,
companies
man.
huge subsidies. For European shoppers, this was great. Who doesn't want a cheaper car? But for European car makers, this is a disaster. In April of 2025, Chinese automakers held 8.9% of Europe's EV market. Just so you understand how crazy large this is, it is almost larger than Audi and Tesla's share combined. And for month-to-month sales, BYD in particular has overtaken Tesla in European EV sales for the first time. In April, it sold 7,231 units.
I can't tell if that's good or not.
The
Tesla? I mean, that's an American brand, right? It's pretty
Starting
good.
to see the trend here. China is digging its nails into every single pie. Naturally, such market dominance does not
What I
come
mean,
without
dude, they be
consequences.
trying to
Europe,
stick
companies
their
like
grubby little
Volkswagen,
fingers
which
in
employs
everything.
thousands of people in Germany,
So
started
annoying.
losing sales. Factories that made car parts were hit even harder, along with several other European industries. At the current rate, tens of thousands of jobs have been lost, as several manufacturers like Porsche, VW, Audi, and
Jeez.
Volvo have announced major
Porsche.
cuts. Other industries were feeling the pinch too. Steel from China is so cheap that European steelmakers can't keep up. Places like Italy, where small factories make various machinery, are already closing. In Poland, workers and manufacturing are nervous about their jobs. The numbers tell the whole story. In 2024, China sent $600 billion worth of goods to the EU, making it the biggest source of imports for Europe. But Europe wasn't selling nearly as much back to China. The trade deficit was a shocking $330 billion. This surpasses their $320 billion deficit in 2023, but remains lower than the record $427 billion deficit in 2022. That's a harsh pattern of money flowing out of Europe and into China. This imbalance has finally started to scare European leaders. They worry that if this keeps up, entire industries could
now it
collapse
is?
as China takes over.
These guys are fucking
The shifting
hilarious.
moods haven't just been about money alone. There has been a bigger fear. What happens if Europe gets too dependent on China? China controls 70% of the world's battery production, and most of Europe's electric vehicles rely on Chinese batteries. If China ever cuts off those supplies, say during a trade dispute, Europe's car industry could grind to a halt. The same goes for Chinese equipment Europe needs for its hospitals. This isn't just a random worry. Back during the COVID-19 pandemic, Europe learned just how risky it is to rely on one country for critical supplies. When China faced its own shortages,
even if the situation wasn't like that, you would still never want to just rely on one person. Like, are you out of your mind? Putting all your chips in, like, have these guys not watched My Hero Academia? Do they not know what happens when you only rely on one person? Like how the entire society relied only on All Might, and then, you know, everything got flamboozled. You know, it was just easy to topple their society because they only relied on All Might.
it held on to things like masks and medicine, leaving Europe in a tough spot. That memory stuck with European leaders, and it's shaping how they think about China today. Many Europeans are wary of partnering with Beijing. According to a recent poll conducted in 11 EU member states by the European Council on Foreign Relations,
what do you mean?
only an average of just 4% consider China to be a quote-unquote ally. 37% regard it as a rival or an adversary. In countries like France, where protecting local businesses is a big deal, politicians are speaking out. Marine Le Pen, a prominent French politician, has been vocal about blocking Chinese goods to save French jobs. Even moderate leaders like Germany's chancellor are admitting that the trade imbalance is a problem. They're saying Europe needs to stand up for its workers and not let China take over. This new shift in attitude is a big change from the days when Europe was excited about Chinese investment. It's setting the stage for tougher policies and a colder relationship. While Europe...
All these countries do, they're quickly starting to realize that they're biting off more they can chew with China.
is grappling with these concerns, the United States is adding more pressure. President Trump is not backing down on China, and in fact, he's turning up the heat. His new trade policy is all about tariffs. He aims to make Chinese products as expensive as he can in the US. Right now, he's imposing a 125% tariff on some Chinese electronics and a 50% tariff on steel. But Trump isn't stopping there. He's offering a deal to other countries, including Europe.
Freaking shouldn't. Why would he stop?
If you limit Chinese goods in your markets, the US will cut tariffs on your exports. For example, if the EU agrees to restrict Chinese steel, the US might lower rates on European cars or wine. This is a tempting offer because Europe sends about $570 billion worth of goods to the US every year. Better access to the American market could mean more sales and, again, more jobs. That's exactly what Donald Trump's plan is.
You would think so.
To further alienate China on the world stage and leave Beijing stranded. The challenge now is that the EU isn't just one country, it's 27 nations, each with its own priorities. Germany, for instance, is hesitant to pick a fight with China. Its car makers like BMW and Mercedes sell 1 in every 3 cars in China. If the EU gets tough on Chinese imports, China might hit back by making it harder for German companies to operate there. In 2024, China was Germany's second biggest export market, worth about 100 billion euro. Losing that would hurt. However, guess who was number 1? That's right, the US. So Germany also sees merit in the US's proposal. France is also open to siding with the US as it sees China's growing influence as a threat. This is especially true in industries like fashion and food, which are central to France's economy. Smaller EU countries are leaning towards the US. Poland, Lithuania, and the Czech Republic see China not just as an economic rival, but as a geopolitical one. They're already wary of China's ties to Russia, especially since the war in Ukraine. For those nations, aligning with the US makes a lot of sense. It's a way to protect their security and their economies. But getting all 27 EU countries to agree is like herding cats. At trade meetings in Brussels, leaders constantly...
Is that even possible? Can you even herd cats? How would that even go, herding cats? Like the freaking... Like the hardest thing to do.
Argue over what to do. Some want to follow the...
Like herding cats? Like cats are like the most independent creatures ever. I feel like they would just run away from you. Or try to take you on a 1v1.
And impose their own tariffs on China. Others want to keep talking with Beijing to avoid a trade war. The EU's trade commissioner, Valdis Dombrovskis, is trying to find a balance. Trump's tariffs are doing more than just pressuring Europe. They're changing how trade works around the world. Countries like Japan and South Korea are feeling the squeeze too. In April of 2025, South Korea's exports to China fell by 10%, partially because of US tariffs disrupting global supply chains. Chinese car makers like Toyota are reporting slower sales in China as well. This shows how...
Which is so ironic because they're like Asian brands. I mean, I'm pretty sure Toyota and Nissan... Yeah, Toyota... Nissan, Mitsubishi, Lexus, Subaru. I feel like I'm missing one. No, I think that's it. Yeah, I feel like I'm pretty sure all these companies are like, you know, I'm pretty sure
Trump's
they're
policies
Japanese.
are forcing everyone
Yeah, I don't
to
think we have
rethink
any
their
Chinese
trade
cars
relationships.
because, you know,
For Europe, the choice is tough.
China's
Side
on
with the
some
US and
dickhead
risk
shit.
angering China, or stay neutral and face higher tariffs from America. Either way, China's position is getting weaker, and Europe is starting to see it as less of a partner and more of a problem. So, with the clouds looming, is China sitting idly? Of course not. With Europe slamming the door, Xi Jinping is hitting the roads to find new friends. In April of 2025, he zipped through Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia, inking over 100 deals on trade, politics, and infrastructure. These weren't just handshakes. China's pushing hard to lock in markets for its goods, from electronics to steel, as Europe tightens the screws. In Vietnam, Xi signed railway pacts to speed up trade, while in Cambodia, he backed canals and smart cities to tie them closer to Beijing. Malaysia's got promises of cash for ports and rails, all part of China's plan to replace Europe's huge market. But it's not all smooth sailing. These countries are wary.
it's never smooth
struggling
sailing. Why
with
would
US
it be?
tariffs and
Life
China's
is never that
heavy
easy.
hand.
Why
Xi's
should it
charm
be for you?
offensive screams desperation, as Europe's rejection has Beijing scrambling to keep its economy alive.
Desperation!
However, new partners might not trust China's big talk after its European flop. And it's not just
Oh,
new markets.
anybody
China's
trusts
older plans
anything
in
with
Europe,
China.
like its Belt and Road Initiative, have also crashed and burned. We'll talk about that in just a minute. As if the tariff pressure wasn't enough on its own, China is also making things worse for itself. Beijing is trying to push back against Western influence, but it's doing so in ways that are backfiring. That brings us to their most recent embarrassment. The CCP tried to pull a sneaky move by using TikTok to mess with Western
Very sneaky.
brands, and
Oh
ended up
my,
making
of
things
course.
worse
Their
for
number one
themselves with
app,
Europe.
TikTok.
You know who
Cock
is
tick.
producing high quality accessories for those luxury brands like Chanel, Estee
Not
Lauder,
you.
L'Oreal? You're saying you're the supplier behind all these beauty accessories for those big luxury brands? L'Oreal,
Right.
Chanel, Bobbi Brown, and even Rosewood Hotel.
Last
Bobbi
week we
Brown.
also received an order, Royce Den. Yeah, the comb like 20,000
The comb,
pieces, one
like-
color. It's our packing plate. Here is one of our warehouse. Here is our material area. All the acid
This looks so
we have
fake, it's
ordered
not even
here.
Oh,
freaking
tell
funny.
me, what is this? This is like
I bet you
PVC or
these women don't even know what the hell's going on in this
Material.
warehouse. They
The material
probably
is
wouldn't even
eco-friendly
they probably
and-
wouldn't even be able to tell you where one thing is in this warehouse. Yeah, they're probably all just reading that script right there on that easel. Hands down, that's
More
gotta be what's
durable
going on.
With Germany's new government sworn in this June, ready to
Wait,
crank up the
whoa,
pressure,
whoa, whoa,
Europe
whoa, whoa.
standing tall.
Hold on. I accidentally just clicked the wrong button. No!
Politicians are speaking out. Marine Le Pen, what to do? Some want to follow the US and impose their own tariffs on China, bringing the US tariffs and China's heavy.
It's our
There we go.
packing plate. Here is one of our warehouse. Here is our material area. All
Yeah,
the
this looks
acid
so
board
fake,
we
it's
have
not even
ordered
funny.
here.
Oh, tell me, what is this? This is like PVC or acrylic?
Acetate material. The material is eco-friendly and more durable and flexible than PVC or acrylic materials. It's the most expensive material
How
in our
expensive?
For this one, for example, this one like 50 RMB one piece.
One piece, 50
Yeah, 50
RMB.
RMB. And
That's the cost of it.
Yeah.
You see, the CCP saw TikTok as a way to shape what people think. Around early 2025, with trade fights heating up between China and Europe, the CCP decided to use TikTok as a weapon. It went after Western brands like Lululemon and Louis Vuitton, which have a lot of fans in Europe. The idea was to make these brands look bad, like they were using cheap labor or disrespecting cultures. This was aimed at getting European shoppers to ditch them and buy
Right.
Chinese stuff instead. Pretty shady, right? They paid influencers to post videos slamming these brands.
Shady would
and
be an
TikTok's algorithm
understatement.
pushed those
That's just
videos
like
to
the
millions
standard.
of viewers. The CCP hid their tracks by funneling money through middlemen, but the whole thing had their fingerprints all over it.
Middlemen.
And here's where it gets messy.
Middlemen.
Europe wasn't buying it.
Don't
First, the
shoot
European
the
Union, or EU,
middleman,
was already
he's just
keeping a
the
close eye on
messenger.
TikTok because of privacy issues. When they caught wind of this campaign, they slapped TikTok with a huge fine for sending user data to China.
They
which
gave him a
broke their
nice
privacy
knuckle
laws.
sandwich.
Then they started digging into whether TikTok's
They
algorithm was being
hit him
used
with
to
the
spread Chinese
yada.
propaganda. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It made Europe see China as a threat to its security. The CCP thought they could control the narrative, but instead they gave
Because they
Europe a
are.
reason
What do you
to
mean?
crack down even harder. On top of
If
that,
they're willing to
European
do this
shoppers
crap
didn't
to
fall
the
for
United
TikTok
States, what
videos.
makes you think they're
A lot
not
of people
gonna do
saw
it to
through the
Britain?
lies, especially when brands like Lululemon said
What?
they didn't even use Chinese
What kind of
factories
nonsense is
mentioned in
that?
the videos. Louis Vuitton also pushed back, saying they weren't involved in anything the videos claimed. People started talking on platforms like X, calling TikTok a tool for Chinese propaganda. Instead of hurting the brands, the campaign made TikTok look untrustworthy, and Europeans started questioning why they were even using it. The CCP's plan to turn
Yeah,
shoppers
why
against
is
Western
anybody
brands
using it? It's literally
flopped,
just brain
and it
rot.
actually made people more loyal to those companies. This whole mess didn't just stop at social media, it hit China's wallet as well. Europe was already trying to spend less on Chinese products because of trade issues, and this TikTok stunt gave them even more reason to speed that up. Big European companies started moving their factories to places like Southeast Asia or Eastern Europe, cutting China out of the deal. By trying to hurt Western brands, the CCP
any
ended up hurting
logical
their own
person
businesses,
would have already
which
done this.
is the last thing that they actually wanted. In the end, this TikTok campaign was a massive misstep for the CCP. They thought they could outsmart Europe, but they just made themselves look like bullies trying to control what people think. It cost them their trust, their money, and their
They've
influence.
always done that,
And Europe
though.
is now more united than
confused
ever
as
in
to why
pushing
people are
back
confused,
against China,
and you're
and this
surprised
failed
that they do
stunt
it now.
only made that push stronger. It's a classic case of a plan blowing up in your face. And for China, it's a lesson they won't forget anytime soon. It's not just failed social media sabotage that's causing trouble, though. China's big plan to win Europe over
That's
with its Belt and
hilarious.
Road Initiative has also fallen apart, and Italy's story shows
Good.
why. Back in 2013,
You're like, you're not
China
slick with
launched
that.
its Belt and Road Initiative. This was a flashy plan to spend billions building roads, ports, and railways across Asia, Africa, and Europe. The pitch was simple. China would fund shiny new infrastructure to boost trade, and everyone would win. But for China, it was really about locking
everybody.
countries into its
You mean
grip,
China
spreading
would win.
influence, and flooding markets with its goods.
That's what they forgot
Europe,
to
with its
mention.
wealthy consumers and strategic ports, was a prime target. For a
Yeah,
while,
bro,
it
these
seemed to
guys
work,
think that they're
with Chinese
slick,
cash
dude.
pouring into places like Greece and Serbia. But Europe's not buying it anymore. And Italy's rejection of the
Yeah,
plan
they're
shows
sick of
just how
it. They're sick of the
badly
nonsense. Like, it's so easy to tell that these guys are freaking lying. Like, everything is so traceable. Like, you can easily just track down their patterns. Like, it's just so easy,
China was
man.
calculated. Italy made
It's
waves
as,
in 2019
you know,
when it
it's
became the only
as.
major Western economy to join China's
Easy,
initiative.
dude, it's
Struggling
as.
with a weak economy, Italy saw Chinese money as a lifeline. The deal promised upgrades to ports like Genoa and Trieste, turning Italy into a trade hub for Chinese goods. China's President Xi Jinping rolled into Rome, signing papers and talking up big wins. It looked like a coup for Beijing, proof that its plan could charm even skeptical
Okay,
Western
coup.
nations. But by late 2023, Italy slammed the door shut, pulling out of the deal. Why? Because China's promises turned out
Good.
to be a trap. The benefits Italy hoped for never arrived. Instead of boosting Italian exports, the deal let Chinese products flood in, hurting local businesses. Italy's trade deficit with China grew, and ports sat waiting for projects that never started. Chinese companies were supposed
Never
to build,
happened.
but the money dried
It's
up.
not gonna
or got
happen,
tangled up
buddy.
in red tape. Italians felt
Sorry,
duped,
you missed
like
your-
they'd
you
been
missed your
sold a
chance.
shiny dream
I
that
remember to
only
tell
helped
you.
China. Prime Minister
Yeah, that
Giorgia
chance is
Meloni
over.
called it a
It's
series
been
of
deleted.
mistakes.
You blew
And Italy got
it.
nothing but empty promises. Her government,
You know, it was
listening
there,
to fed up
and
voters,
it's gone.
walked away to protect Italian jobs
You know what they
and
say?
pride. Italy's exit wasn't just about bad deals. It was a wake-up call for Europe.
Oh,
Other
no,
countries like Hungary and
Carbo.
Portugal also had signed up,
Yeah,
hoping for
that's
Chinese
exactly what
cash
they
to
looked at
fix
this,
their
that's what they said
economies.
to
But
them.
they
They're
faced the
like,
same
"Oh, now
problems.
Carbo,
Stalled
let's
projects,
go."
growing debts, and worries about China's real motives. Hungary's railway to Serbia, backed by Chinese loans, is a money pit, costing
everything's
way more than
fucking
planned.
backed by
Across Europe,
Chinese
leaders
loans,
started
yeah.
seeing the initiative for what it really was. A way for
I'm
China to push its
surprised.
goods and gain control, not a partnership. This flop hurts China
Gain
badly. Losing
control.
Italy, a key Western player, makes it harder for Beijing to sell its initiative as a global success. It's a sign Europe's done trusting China's big talk. Instead of gaining influence, China's left with a reputation for overpromising. Italy's move fits right into Europe's bigger plan to shield its markets
Overpromising.
and
That's an
stand up to
understatement,
Beijing's
dude.
economic gains. For China,
China
it's
is
another
just a bunch
crack
of
in its
yappers.
dream of dominating global trade, and Europe is making
That's
it
why they
clear
literally
they're
made a
not
deal
playing
with the
ball.
United States.
This
because they
pushback
couldn't
isn't
keep
just
up
about
with
trade
all
or
their
failed projects,
bullshit that they were
Europe's
saying.
also cracking down on
This whole
China's
trade
tech
war.
tricks, starting with companies like Huawei. You see, China is also making waves in the tech world, and not in a good way. Chinese tech giants like Huawei and Xiaomi are huge in Europe, with Huawei alone holding a 20% share of the EU's telecom equipment market
Huawei?
in
It sounds like
2024.
Wawa.
But security concerns
Copyright,
are growing.
maybe?
European governments
Uh-oh.
are worried that Chinese tech could be used to
Potential
spy
other
or
lawsuit?
disrupt critical systems.
Uh-oh.
These fears aren't new, but they're getting louder.
There's always
in
room for
2025,
nuance.
Germany and France
Could
are
always sue
reviewing
somebody.
Huawei's role in their 5G networks, which calls to ban the company outright. This comes after reports that Chinese tech firms are sharing data with Beijing, which raises red flags for Europe's privacy laws. China's response to these concerns
Of
isn't helping.
course,
Instead of
dude, it's
addressing their worries,
Beijing.
Beijing is
Why wouldn't
doubling doubling down. It's accusing Europe of unfairly targeting its companies and threatening to limit European firms' access to China's market. For example, in early 2025, China hinted at stricter rules for European car makers like Volkswagen. This sucks, as Volkswagen relies on China for 40% of their global sales.
Exactly what people want.
It's kind of
just stricter rules, you know? Exactly what people want. When they're, trying to run a business, more strict rules, yep. And you're confused why shit's, going on the way that it is. It's like these people just don't get it, dude. They just don't get how to actually do trade with people. It's just like, me money now, me money, need money now more.
Overall, from their view, if China were willing to invest in Europe, it could mean more factories, more jobs, and more sales for European businesses. France was on board, but for different reasons. French companies make things like wine, perfume, and designer clothes, stuff that China's growing middle class was starting to buy. The idea of a closer relationship with China meant French
make
brands
a bunch of
could sell
omelette
even
tout
more.
fromage.
There was even a big plan called the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment. This was supposed to make it easier for European companies to do business in China and for Chinese companies to invest in Europe. Both sides spent years negotiating it, and for a while it looked like a done deal. The mood was optimistic, and it seemed like China and Europe were building something
For a
that could
while,
last.
it
But
looked,
even as these
but
deals
it's
were
not.
coming together, there were signs of
You
trouble.
fooled yourself.
You see, China wasn't just sending money to Europe, it was sending a flood of goods. By 2023, Chinese products were everywhere in Europe, from cheap electronics to electric cars. Since then, it's only gotten worse. Now, in 2025, amidst the US-China trade war, Chinese exports have been directed to Europe, and they have saturated the markets. This flood has come at the expense of local markets, who, as you might imagine, are being kicked out of business. It hasn't been a slow trickle. It's been a massive wave that started to worry people. This flooding of the
Just like in
market
that
has occurred
70s show.
across all industries, including the automotive industry. Let's talk about electric cars for a second. Chinese companies like BYD and
let's talk
Geely
about
have
it.
taken over
Why
Europe,
not?
which is almost scary.
Fuck
When they
it, right?
entered the market, they began selling electric cars at prices that were hard to beat for European manufacturers. A BYD electric SUV, for example, could cost 20% less than a similar car from Volkswagen or Tesla. How could they do that? The Chinese government was giving these companies huge subsidies. For European shoppers, this was great. Who doesn't want a cheaper car? But for European car
It's
makers, this is a
great.
disaster. In April of 2025, Chinese automakers held 8.9% of Europe's EV market. Just so you understand how crazy large this is, it is almost larger than Audi and Tesla's share combined. And for month-to-month sales, BYD in particular has overtaken Tesla in European EV sales for the first time. In
Audi
April,
and
it sold
Tesla shares combined, that's
7,231
crazy.
units, compared to Tesla's 7,165 units. Are you starting to see the trend here? China is digging its nails into every single pie. Naturally, such market dominance does not come without consequences for Europe. Companies like Volkswagen, which
That's what I've
employs
been saying for a
thousands of
while.
people in
China
Germany,
just getting
started
their grubby
losing
little
sales.
fingers
Factories
stuck
that
in
made car
everything, dude.
parts were hit
They're
even
like the
harder,
world
along with
government
several
from
other
One Piece.
European industries. At the current rate, tens of thousands of jobs have been lost, as several manufacturers like Porsche, VW, Audi, and Volvo have announced major cuts. Other industries were feeling the pinch too. Steel from China is so cheap that European steelmakers can't keep up. Places like
the
Italy,
pinch?
where small factories make
They're
various
gonna be
machinery,
feeling a lot more
are
than a
already
fucking
closing.
pinch.
In Poland, workers and
they're gonna be feeling
manufacturing
these
are
nuts
nervous
on their
about their
chin pretty
jobs.
soon.
The numbers tell the whole story. In 2024, China sent $600 billion worth of goods to the EU.
Does it
making
though?
it the biggest source of imports for.
Do numbers ever really tell the full story?
DJ 808 Naj.
Europe. But Europe wasn't selling nearly as much back to China. The trade deficit was a shocking $330 billion. This surpasses their $320 billion deficit in 2023, but remains lower than the record $427 billion deficit in 2022. That's a harsh pattern of money flowing out of Europe and into China. This imbalance has finally started to scare European leaders. They worry that if this keeps up,
Good.
entire industries could
A little
collapse
fear will
as
do you some
China
good.
takes over. The shifting moods haven't just been about money
Complacency
alone.
leads to
There has
defeat.
been a bigger fear. What happens if Europe gets too dependent on China? China controls
First of all, if you're gonna depend on anybody, China is the last country you'd want to depend on. I would rather depend on the freaking Russians than depend on freaking China. Okay? I would rather depend on freaking goddamn Japan than depend on China. I'd rather depend on myself than depend on China, dude. I'd rather depend on Gangstalicious than depend on China, dude. Thugnificent, Tom, Huey, Riley, Granddad, it don't matter.
70% of the world's battery production, and most of Europe's electric vehicles rely on Chinese batteries. If China ever cuts off those supplies, say during a trade dispute, Europe's car industry could grind to a halt. The same goes for Chinese equipment Europe needs for its hospitals. This isn't just a random worry. Back during the COVID-19 pandemic, Europe learned just how risky it is to rely on one country for critical supplies. When China faced its own shortages, it held on to things like masks and medicine, leaving Europe in a tough spot. That memory stuck with European leaders, and it's shaping how they think about China today. Many Europeans are wary of partnering with Beijing. According to a recent poll conducted in 11 EU member states by the European Council on Foreign Relations, only an average of just 4% consider China to be a quote-unquote ally. 37% regarded as a rival or an adversary. In countries like France, about 100 billion euro. Losing that would hurt. However, guess who was number one? That's right, the US. So Germany also sees merit in the US's proposal. France is also open to siding with the US as it sees China's growing influence as a threat. Like they were using cheap labor or disrespecting cultures. This was aimed at getting European shoppers to ditch them and buy Chinese stuff instead. Pretty shady, right? They paid influencers to post videos slamming these brands, and TikTok's. This sucks, as Volkswagen relies on China for 40% of their global sales. This kind of retaliation is making European leaders think twice about trusting China. If Beijing is willing to punish Europe for protecting its own interests, what kind of partner is that? For never arrived. Instead of boosting Italian exports, the deal let Chinese products flood in, hurting local businesses. Italy's trade deficit with China grew, and ports sat waiting for projects that never started. Chinese companies were supposed to build, but the money dried up or got tangled up in red tape. Italians felt duped, like they'd been sold a shiny dream that only helped China. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni called it a serious mistake, saying Italy got
I'm pretty sure this is where we left off. Yeah, that's why exactly you don't do deals with China, dude. If you think China isn't gonna do a deal that isn't gonna only benefit them, that's the thing. Like, at least when you do a deal with us, you know, at least you get something out of it. But when you do a deal with China, you're just getting fucked in the ass. Straight up fisted.
Nothing but empty promises. Her government,
no lube,
listening to
no
fed
condom,
voters,
no
walked
nothing.
away to protect Italian jobs and
That's why they just tried to
Italy's
freeze
exit
my
wasn't just
camera
about
right now.
bad deals. It was a wake-up call for Europe. Other countries like Hungary and Portugal also had signed up, hoping for Chinese cash to fix their economies. But they faced the same problems: stalled projects, growing debts, and worries about China's real motives. Hungary's railway to Serbia, backed by Chinese loans, is a money pit, costing way more than planned. Across Europe, leaders started seeing the initiative
money
for
pit,
what
money
it really
pit. It's all
was,
about the money
a way for
pit.
China to push its goods and gain control, not a partnership. This flop hurts China badly. Losing Italy, a key Western player, makes it harder for Beijing to sell its initiative as a global success. It's a sign Europe's done trusting China's big talk. Instead of gaining influence, China's left with a reputation for overpromising. Italy's move fits right into Europe's bigger plan to shield its markets and stand up to Beijing's economic games. For China, it's another crack in its dream of dominating global trade, and Europe is making it clear they're not playing along. This pushback isn't just about trade or failed projects, though. Europe's also cracking down on China's tech tricks, starting with companies like Huawei. You see, China is also making waves in the tech world, and not in a good way. Chinese tech giants like Huawei and Xiaomi are huge in Europe, with Huawei alone holding a 20% share of the EU's telecom equipment market in 2024. But security concerns are growing. European governments are worried that Chinese tech could be used to spy or disrupt critical systems. These fears aren't new, but they're getting louder. In 2025, Germany and France are reviewing Huawei's role in their 5G networks, which calls to ban the company outright. This comes after reports that Chinese tech firms are sharing data with Beijing, which raises red flags for Europe's privacy laws. China's response to these concerns isn't helping. Instead of addressing their worries, Beijing is doubling down. It's accusing Europe of unfairly targeting its companies and threatening to limit European firms' access to China's market. For example, in early 2025, China hinted at stricter rules for European car makers like Volkswagen. This sucks, as Volkswagen relies on China for 40% of their global sales. This kind of retaliation is making European leaders think twice about trusting China. If Beijing is willing to punish Europe for protecting its own interests, what kind of partner is that? The answer is becoming clear: not one Europe can rely on. Another area where China is really stumbling is in its approach to Europe's green energy goals. China miscalculated a potential market, and it triggered a push in Europe. You see, Europe is
Lit.
all in on fighting climate change, with plans
Yeah,
to cut
dude.
carbon
I haven't
emissions by
even finished
55% by 2030.
I still have it in my
That means building
fridge.
a lot of solar
I'm
panels,
about to heat
wind
that up.
turbines, and electric cars.
I had
China
curry
says
from like
China
a
dominate. It already makes
an Indian
85%
restaurant
of the
one time.
world's solar panels
I liked
and
it.
60%
It
of
was
the
like
wind turbine
more
components.
spicy than I was
In
expecting.
2024, Chinese companies like
That's
Jinko
not
Solar
real-
and
well,
Longi
no, what is
sent
that? It's not
10
real curry, but
billion
that's not the
euros
same
worth of
curry.
solar equipment to
It's
Europe.
not Sanji level.
This not-so-little act undercut local producers
Sanji's
by
is not
30%.
spicy.
Oh.
This sounds like
It
a win
tastes
for China,
different.
but it's turning into a problem. Europe
know what
doesn't
you're
want to
talking
swap
about, but it's not
one
the same
dependency,
thing.
Russian gas, for another, Chinese green tech. And as you might expect,
I tried
this
it
made
when
the
I worked at
EU's gears
Amazon.
turn. In May of 2025,
They brought
it
us some
proposed a
Indian curry
25%
free,
tariff
but
on Chinese solar
Chinese,
panels
Japanese
and
and
a 20%
Indian curry
tariff
are
on
different.
wind turbine parts. These taxes are
One
designed
of them
to
is
give
like kind of like
European
sweet,
companies, like Germany's
and
Siemens
the other one is
Gamesa,
kind of more
a fighting
spicy, like how you
chance.
said.
Without them, Europe's green energy industry could collapse before it even gets going.
I like the
For
Japanese
example,
one
a
better.
solar factory in Spain shut down in 2024 because it could not compete with Chinese prices. That meant 300
cow
lost
wandering by
jobs
the
and a
solar
step
field.
backwards for
Are you
Europe's
still
climate
mid-bid?
plans. The EU's tariffs are about more than
No,
money.
it's about
They're about making sure Europe can build its own future without relying on
3
China.
minutes.
And much like all the other
Yeah.
cases, China's reaction is making things worse. Instead of negotiating, Beijing is threatening to limit
Dude, they're never going to negotiate. Look at how they reacted with the whole tariff shit. Like they literally essentially admitted defeat, but didn't admit defeat. They had to make it seem like they won or some shit, so they had like some secret deal with, like, bro, these guys are such cowards, dude. Like, you just can't admit defeat, bro. Like that's what I'm saying. You could say whatever you want about the United States, but at least we know when to admit defeat. Like, for instance, look at Afghanistan. Like, yeah, what Trump is saying is true. Like, if we had like better generals and shit, we should have easily won that shit. But given the fact that we didn't, we had fucking weaklings. At least we knew when to pull out, you know. Like these oh my god,
Europe's
dude.
access to rare earth minerals. These minerals are critical
I
for
just
making
don't know when
batteries
to
and
quit.
turbines. China controls 90% of the global supply of these minerals, so this is a big threat. In early 2025, China cut exports of rare earths to Europe by 10%, saying it needed them for its own
Yeah, like, that's
industries.
literally gonna do
This
anything.
move back
You could cut all the rare exports you want, dude. As soon as your main source of income, the United States, starts saying, you know, fuck off, it's game over. It's literally cryptocurrency, my boy. My boy.
Europe is now investing 2 billion euro in developing its own mineral supplies. It is developing lithium mines in Portugal and recycling programs in Sweden. It's also striking deals with countries like Canada and Australia to get these minerals elsewhere. China's strong-arm tactics are pushing Europe to find other partners, and that's a trend Beijing can't afford. Beyond all this, Europe is tightening rules on Chinese investments. Chinese companies used to buy up European businesses, from ports to tech firms, with little pushback. Not anymore. In 2025, the EU strengthened
Not
its investment
anymore,
screening
Bobo.
process, which checks whether foreign buyers pose a security risk. This has already stopped several Chinese deals. For example, the German government stopped Elmos, a Dortmund-based chip maker, from selling its production facility to a Chinese company.
Elmos?
Officials argued that the acquisition
Sounds like,
would endanger public
Los
order
Alamos.
and security in Germany. Another block deal involved ERS Electronic, a Bavarian semiconductor company specializing in thermal wafer testing. The German government did not disclose details, but confirmed that a
Wafer,
second
like a
Chinese
wafer
acquisition
cookie?
was halted. The message is clear. Europe isn't letting China take over its critical industries. Another big step is closer ties with
Good.
the U.S. Trump's tariff
Good.
deal, where countries get lower U.S. tariffs if they restrict Chinese goods, is gaining traction. In April of 2025, the EU and the U.S. started talks on new trade agreements focused on reducing dependency on China. This includes joint
It's like China got a pinkle. crap, dude. This shit again. This shit's so annoying. Getting your headset soon, chat.
Projects on semiconductors, where China controls 60% of the supply chain. By working together, the US and the EU hope to build their own supply chains and keep China out. For Europe, this is a way to balance its trade relationships without being pulled too far into Trump's orbit. It's a pragmatic move, but it's bad news for Beijing. These changes are reshaping China's place in the world. With Europe pulling back, China is losing access to a market that buys $600 billion of its goods every year. And this isn't just a numbers game, it's a geopolitical shift. China's economy is already slowing, with growth at 4.5% in 2024, below historical averages. Losing Europe's trust makes it harder for China to keep its factories running and its people employed. Meanwhile, Europe is finding new partners like India and Southeast Asia to fill the gap. India, for example, signed a trade deal with the EU in 2025, promising to supply electronics and textiles at a competitive price. This shows Europe is moving on, and China, they're being left behind. The stakes are high for China, and it's not just about...
And honestly, I think this is a good thing because it was a fatal mistake to just depend everything on China. Why would anybody think that that's a good idea? Like, that's why everything is so expensive right now, because everything comes from China, so China can set the prices. But if we, you know, expand everything to everywhere else and all the other countries, they have the option to, you know, be like, okay, they're offering this price, so let's try to go lower. Okay, they're, you know, it offers competitiveness. That's what you want in a market. You don't want a monopoly. You want you want a competitive market. You want to be able to compete, because competing is better for consumers. That means the companies will offer better things, better, you know, incentives, better things. You know, the quality of their items will be better. In the long run, it's just overall going to be better for the consumers. Versus a monopoly, the company could just do whatever the hell they want, which you can kind of see in a lot of companies now. You know, like for instance, like look at Star Wars. They can kind of get away with all the nonsense that they've been doing because there's no other company that can compete with Star Wars. Look at, for instance, Rebel Moon. Look at Rebel Moon. Rebel Moon tried competing against Star Wars. That shit was doo-doo. Nobody liked Rebel Moon. Now it's just like crickets. Nobody's talking about it. And then meanwhile, look at Star Wars. They could release shit like The Acolyte and freaking Obi-Wan Kenobi show. You know, all this nonsense that nobody wants to watch, and it's like they're honky-dory, you know?
About trade. Beijing's global influence depends on being seen as a reliable partner. But with Europe turning away, that image is crumbling. Other countries are watching, and they're starting to rethink their own ties with China. Australia, for instance, is pushing back on Chinese investments, citing the same security concerns as Europe. Even in Africa, where China has spent billions on infrastructure, some nations are questioning whether the debt is worth it. China's dream of leading the global economy is slipping, and Europe's rejection is a big reason why. So, where does this leave us? Europe's turn against China is a story of high hopes gone wrong. It started with China's big plans to win over the EU, back when both sides saw a chance to make money together. But China's flood of cheap goods, its cultural missteps, and its aggressive tactics changed the mood. Europe, worried about its jobs, its industries, and its security, is now pushing back. Tariffs, investment rules, and new alliances with the US are all part of this shift. For China, the consequences are real. A weaker economy, fewer friends, and a tougher road ahead. This isn't just about Europe and China. It's about the world. Trade is how countries connect. And when a major player like the EU changes course, everyone feels it. China's mistakes are costing it dearly, and Europe's response is setting a new tone for global trade. The days of easy deals and open markets are fading, replaced by caution and competition. For Beijing, the lesson is clear. You can't bully your way to the top. Europe is standing its ground, and China is learning that the hard way.
Because if you don't, you're just going to continue getting bullied. And eventually it's going to be not even the you, it's just going to be the China you. Managers, my camera froze. Don't tell me my camera's been frozen this whole time. Anyways, this video has honestly been long enough. I gotta talk to Glibidus about some stuff and help him with some PC stuff. You know, I'll still be streaming, so everybody else, you know, hang out. Everybody out, you know, YouTube. Make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe. I will try my best to remember to leave the links down below. Obviously, it's from Business Basics. make sure to leave a like, comment on his, and then when you're done with that, make sure to come back here, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Check out the Kick, the Twitch, and the Instagram, all the same name, and I will see you guys in the next video.